polished in the
Yeah, I think it's like the whole.
There's a person who does it.
And then oh no, I
Oh wait, I just saw this painting from 1986 and it reminded me of the renovation period in Vietnam that we were researching.
So what have you researched so far?
So, in the late 20th century, Vietnam underwent one of the most dramatic transformations in its modern history. Economic reforms known as Đổi Mới, announced in 1986, shifted the country from a centrally planned economy towards market liberalization and cautious cultural opening. These changes reshaped not only everyday life, but also the very conditions under which art could be produced, exhibited, and interpreted. These projects examine how Vietnamese visual artists working between 1985 and 2000 used their practices to visually interpret personal and collective memory amid this profound period of transition. While the Renovation era is widely acknowledged as a turning point in Vietnam's economic and political trajectory, far less attention has been given to how artists internalized, responded to, and reimagined these transformations. The issue is not simply a lack of historical knowledge, it's that Vietnam's contemporary art history has been overshadowed by narratives of war, propaganda art, or post-2000s globalization. What remains underexplored is how artists during the late 1980s and 1990s, before the international art market began paying close attention, used art as a way to reconstruct individual subjectivity and negotiate a shifting national identity. This gap matters. It matters to art history because these artists laid the groundwork for contemporary Vietnamese art. It matters to Southeast Asian studies because Vietnam's trajectory differed from its neighbors, creating a unique artistic response to modernization. And it matters to cultural memory studies because artworks become visual archives of how people lived through social and ideological change. Thinking about our project, this research is guided by one central question. How do selected Vietnamese visual artists from 1985 to 2000s visually interpret collective and personal memory in relation to identity and socio-political transformation? And we also had a few supporting questions that we're gonna examine: visual strategies, artist intentions, and the intersection of private memory with shifting historical narratives during renovation. Do you have any artist selections in mind?
Well, honestly, I was thinking for this project, we can focus on 3 artists since we need someone whose works are accessible through museum archives, online databases, and exhibitions catalogs. And I had a few names, like Trương Tân, who is known for confronting censorship, sexuality, and policing the body. Trần Lương, also a key figure in performance and video art, and he also a co-founder of the independent collective named Gang of Five. And also like the very famous one is Dinh Q, who is internationally recognized for women photographic tapestries and that transform war memories and trauma into new visual forms. And together they all represent diverse artistic strategies like performance, collage, painting, installation that illuminates different dimensions of how memory can be made visible. And I also think that to analyze the visual strategies of these artists, the social context that you mentioned was extremely important too, because it is impossible to understand their work without understanding the contradictions of Đổi Mới era. And political scientists such as Nguyen in 2016 and scholar like Pham in 2016 described this period as one of the economic opening period with continued ideological discipline. Artists has increased exposure to global aesthetic, but still face strict censorship, limited funding, and the absence of formal art institution. This clash between openness and repression, between the global visibility and state control, created a unique environment. Artists often relied on symbolism, metaphor, body gesture, repetition, and material experimentation as subtle strategies to bypass the surveillance and communicate experiences of memories and identity. And their work is not simply aesthetic, it's a negotiation with power.
That's actually a good point. I was thinking to ground this study though, we can draw on 3 major bodies of literature: memory studies, Vietnamese contemporary art studies, and Southeast Asian regional discourse. The first one, collective memory and cultural identity. So Assmann and Czaplicka from 1995, they argue that the cultural memory is continually reconstructed through symbolic forms, stories, rituals, and arts that societies use to interpret their past. Nora's concept of lieu de mémoire reinforces the idea that cultural objects hold and reactivate memory. In Vietnam, where memories of war, socialism, and reform coexist, art becomes a crucial site for reconstructing identity.
Oh, and also like the second part could be like the Vietnamese contemporary art studies, right? That you just mentioned. A scholar like Nora in 2011 emphasized that Southeast Asian artists often operate without strong historical canons or institutional support. In Vietnam, these conditions shaped how artists experimented during the 1990s. Maravillas in 2022 also highlights that how artists in Vietnam and Cambodia use contemporary art to reimagine temporality and social space, a key theme for artists working through transition. And Krafskaya in 2022 also situates Vietnam 1990s art scene as an interdisciplinary, politically sensitive, and driven by small independent groups rather than formal institutions. This scholarship reveals that a landscape where artists navigated censorship, experimented with new mediums, and articulated emerging identities, but rarely links these practices directly to memory production, which is where our studies intervenes.
I think it's also important to consider regional comparison. Placing Vietnam within a Southeast Asian frame is crucial. While Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines also saw artistic experimentation in the 1980s and 90s, Vietnam's experience differed because the shift from socialism to market economy happened inside a one-party political system. This contrast sharpens our understanding of how Vietnamese artists devise alternate strategies for addressing memory, more coded, quieter, or materially symbolic than their regional peers. Wait, so we're basically done. We have our whole literature review.
Well, not quite. We're still going to need to work on our methodology. I have a few suggestions. The study can use a qualitative visual analysis approach. This would be guided by theories of collective memory and post-colonial identity. The research will revolve around a formal analysis, looking at composition, material, form, and technique, a thematic analysis, looking at motifs of trauma, fragmentation, censorship, identity, and embodiment, contextual research, so that would include artist interviews, exhibition catalogs, and critical essays, and then finally, interpretive readings, analyzing how visual gestures reconstruct memory and respond to socio-political change. These methods align closely with the research question and will allow the artwork itself to guide the interpretation.
The data will be drawn from secondary sources like museum collections, online exhibitions, and academic databases, catalog essays, and published artist interviews, right?
Well, the analysis will follow a thematic coding process. So we'll start with identifying recurring visual strategies such as erasure, repetition, weaving, bodily gestures, and then we'll connect these strategies to specific forms of memory, individual, collective, political, and traumatic. We'll then situate each artwork with artists' lived experience of Đổi Mới, and then we'll finally compare findings across the three artists to identify patterns of divergence. The credibility will be supported through triangulation between artworks, artist statements, and scholarships.
So we have considered this project contributes to three important conversations. First, it helps audiences unfamiliar with the Vietnamese history understand how art gives shape to lived experiences during a time of rapid change. Second, it bridges the gap between political history and visual culture, showing how artists internalize and reinterpret the contribution of Đổi Mới. Third, by situating Vietnam within a Southeast Asian context, the study demonstrates that memory making in art is not a universal process, but shaped by specific political and cultural structures. Ultimately, this research argues that contemporary art is not merely a reflection of society. It's a tool for negotiating identity, producing knowledge, and imagining new ways of being.
Okay, wow. So just by examining how artists like Trương Tân, Trần Lương, and Dinh Q make memory visible through visual form.
Yeah, so this project seeks to illuminate the intimate, often fragile relationships between personal experience, political transformation, and cultural identity in post-Đổi Mới Vietnam.
Exactly. The artwork of this period, they're more than the creative expressions. They're historical documents, emotional archives, and acts of resistance that help us understand how societies they remember, heal, and redefine themselves.
Okay, so wow, we're done. We're done. We did it.